WADR, promoting dialogue. It's midday in Dakar. Good afternoon and thank you for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasted on 94.9 FM and around the world on wadr.org. This is NEWSLINK. Here are the top stories. ECOWAS Court of Justice reviews appeal for release of ousted President Mohamed Bazoum in Niger and family. Togo agrees to mediate between Niger and the international community. Opposition politician Obi criticizes Nigeria's Supreme Court ruling confirming Tinubu election win.
These are hefty allegations that should not have been treated with levity. More apparent, the Supreme Court's judgment willfully condoned breaches of the Constitution relative to established qualifications and parameters for candidates in presidential elections.
A national strike in Mali's vocational high schools continues, demanding over 50 billion CFA francs from state. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Imo Edit with NEWSLINK.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's begin with the ECOWAS Court of Justice reviewing the appeal for the release of the ousted Nigerian President Mohamed Bazoum and his family on Monday. This application was submitted by their legal representatives a few weeks ago. As Ogibirika reports, the Community Court of Justice is anticipated to render its judgment on this case on November 30.
The legal team representing the ousted president brought his case before the Community Court of Justice, which operates within the regional bloc of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. During the proceedings in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, Seydou Jiang, a member of Bazoum's legal team, urged the court to declare that the forceful removal of Bazoum's government amounted to a violation of his political rights. Jiang, speaking from Dakar, Senegal, emphasized that Bazoum should be released unconditionally and reinstated as the president of Niger. The lawyers representing Bazoum also argued that his detention, along with that of his wife and son, constituted a violation of their human rights. In response, Aissatou Zada, the lawyer representing the Niger junta, contended that Bazoum, his wife and son were not arbitrarily detained or restricted, asserting that they had the freedom to move as they wished. The defense claimed that the president was being held at home for his own security. Bazoum's legal team expressed their inability to communicate with him since October 20, following allegations by the junta that the former president had attempted to escape with the assistance of accomplices. The case, regional experts say, raises critical questions about the rule of law, human rights and legitimacy of the transitional authorities in Niger, reflecting the complexities of the country's ongoing political situation.
Ogibirika reporting there. Meanwhile, Togo has agreed to facilitate dialogue between Niger and the international community, according to Robert Dussey, the country's Minister of Foreign Affairs, during a jointly moderated press briefing on Monday with Salifou Modi, Minister of Defense of Niger, in a 24-hour visit to Lomé. Togo also confirmed the creation of the Transition Support Group under the aegis of the African Political Alliance, APA. Francis Boniface has the details.
The Nigerian Minister of Defense arrived in Lomé on Monday for a working mission in order in particular to request Togo's guarantee of the ongoing withdrawal of French forces in the same way as the United States. The main demand is a total withdrawal of French forces, declared Salifou Modi, specifying that following an agreement, the withdrawal is underway. During the press briefing, the Togolese Foreign Affairs Minister Robert Dussey recalled the position of Togo, which had always opposed the seizure of power by force, but remains in favor of peace and collective stability in a regional environment confronted with destabilizing actions of groups armed terrorists and under security threat. Recall the military took power in Niger in a coup d'etat on July 26, ending the mandate of President Mohamed Bazoum, who remains held. The military government subsequently issued the French forces a 1-month deadline to withdraw from the country. Paris initially rejected this deadline before finally announcing the departure of its 1,500 soldiers who were deployed as part of the Barkhane force.
Francis Boniface reporting there. Now, despite the Supreme Court ruling confirming President Bola Tinubu's victory in February's election, Nigeria's Labour Party leader, Peter Obi, vowed on Monday to keep fighting for a new Nigeria. Recall Nigeria's apex court on October 26 rejected an attempt to overturn the election result by the main opposition leader, Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party, and Peter Obi, who came second and third in the vote, slamming the door on any legal challenge against Tinubu, who says he won fairly. As in previous presidential elections, a challenge in court, the Supreme Court judgment followed the pattern. Court challenges have not succeeded in overturning results, especially in a presidential election. Speaking for the first time since the ruling, Peter Obi, a former two-term governor who campaigned as an outsider, told reporters the judgment was a disappointment and contradicted overwhelming evidence of election rigging, false claims of technical glitches, and other irregularities.
These are hefty allegations that should not have been treated with levity. More apparent, the Supreme Court's judgment willfully condoned breaches of the Constitution relative to established qualifications and parameters for candidates in presidential elections. With this counter-intuitive judgment, the Supreme Court has transferred a heavy moral burden from the courtroom to our national conscience. Our young democracy is ultimately the main victim and casualty of the courtroom drama. Without equivocation, this judgment amounts to a breach of confidence that Nigerians have in our judiciary. To that extent, it is a show of unreasonable force against the very Nigerian people from whom the power of the Constitution drives. The Supreme Court's ruling may represent the state of the law in 2023, but not present demand for substantive justice. The judgment missed principles and precedents, defining and qualifying particulars up to the highest extent allowed by law. Nigeria holds out hope of infinite possibilities leading to a desirable greatness.
Obi's supporters, known as the Obedients, have been vocal in their criticism of the Supreme Court ruling. They have accused the court of being biased and of protecting the interests of the ruling party. Well, we remain in Nigeria, where at least 15 rice farmers were killed and several others feared abducted in northeast Borno State after suspected Boko Haram insurgents attacked 3 villages. The attack, according to Mohammed Haruna, secretary of the Zabamari Rice Farmers Association, occurred in the villages of Kushebe, Kakud and Bolabulin in the Mafa local government area in the state, about 15 kilometers from the capital, Maiduguri. WDL's Abuja correspondent Usman Umar reports.
The Rice Farmers Association secretary Mohammed Haruna said the terrorists stormed the villages on motorcycles and attacked the farmers who were harvesting crops from their rice fields. They did not use guns to kill them. Instead, they used cutlasses and knives to stab them to death while others were beheaded, Haruna said. He said 15 farmers were confirmed killed in the attack, adding that some managed to escape. The number of those missing is still unknown. The attack is the latest in a series of assaults by Boko Haram terrorists in northeast of Nigeria. The group has been waging a 14-year insurgency in the region aimed at establishing an Islamic state. At least 40 people were killed in the northeastern Yobe state last week, the first major Boko Haram attack in the state in 18 months. Last week, Nigerian lawmakers approved a supplementary budget that has a highest allocation for defense and security. For NEWSLINK on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. NEWSLINK continues.
Well, let's take you to Mali, where the call for a week-long national strike by vocational high schools has been observed in the capital, Bamako. Many vocational and high schools have remained closed as advocates for these institutions demand over 50 billion CFA francs in contributions from the state. On the second day of the strike, students in exam classes are concerned that the action may have repercussions for the remainder of the academic year. Sang Donald Mendy shares more details in this report by our Bamako correspondent, Aliu Cham.
A private high school on the outskirts of Bamako is currently experiencing a halt in classes as the strike ordered by the Ministry of Education has been duly observed. Some students have chosen to come to school to practice their math skills, fearing that the strike may disrupt their school program, especially for those who are preparing to sit for the bachelor's degree examination this year. Musa Traore and his classmates who are scheduled to take the exam are concerned about the potential repercussions of the strike on their academic progress. Kumba Makalo, also preparing for the exam this year, openly expresses her frustration with the situation. The general supervisor of the private high school attempts to reassure students by stating that any lost time during the strike will be compensated for once the strike is resolved, but there is uncertainty regarding the strike's duration. As negotiations continue between the Ministry of Education and the promoters of private high schools and vocational schools, the possibility of a disrupted school year looms over the country's private educational institutions. The strike underscores the ongoing challenges facing the education system in Mali.
The report was filed in by our Bamako correspondent Aliu Cham and voiced by Sang Donald Mendy. Now, the Ghana Union of Traders Association, GUTA, has shut down 38 retail shops owned by foreigners, predominantly Nigerians, in the eastern regional capital, Kaforidua. This move is part of GUTA's ongoing effort to reduce the presence of foreigners in the retail market. Tensions and clashes between GUTA and foreign individuals engaged in retail businesses have escalated in the past, leading to diplomatic strains between Ghana and Nigeria. WDR's Nadede Tete reports that the dispute centers on the influx of Nigerian citizens into the local market, where they engage in retail businesses that are typically reserved for local traders.
GUTA's recent actions stem from the assertion that government has not effectively enforced the Ghana Investment Promotion Act, Act 865, which prohibits foreigners from participating in retail business in the country. Eastern Regional Vice Chairman of GUTA, Samuel Akins, expressed concerns about the lack of enforcement, emphasizing its adverse impact on local businesses.
The activities are affecting the economy. Look at the soaring inflation, rapid depreciation of the Ghana cedi, the collapse of the manufacturing sector, escalating shop rental costs, and damage to the export sector, among other things.
In 2021, Ghana and Nigeria signed a joint communique during the extraordinary ECOWAS summit, aiming to resolve a 25-year retail dispute between the two countries. This agreement aimed to exempt Nigerians from the $1 million minimum capital requirement specified by the GIPC Act, which had previously restricted their participation in Ghana's retail market. For West Africa Democracy Radio, Nadede Tete, Accra.
You're listening to NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar, and our partner stations across the sub-region. Here is a reminder of our top stories. ECOWAS Court of Justice reviews appeal for release of ousted Nigerian President Mohamed Bazoum and family. Togo agrees to mediate between Niger and the international community. Opposition politician Obi criticizes Nigeria's Supreme Court ruling confirming Tinubu election win. A national strike in Mali's vocational high schools continues, demanding over 50 billion CFA francs from state. And still ahead, we do have a guest interview segment, the press review, and sports news. Please stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
We're streaming live on wadr.org, YouTube, and Facebook. Now, the ECOWAS Commission has initiated a 10-day training session in the Gambian capital, Banjul, focusing on enhancing physical security and stockpile management (PSSM) across its member states. This collaborative effort between the ECOWAS Commission, the National Commission on Small Arms of the Gambia, and the Bonn International Center for Conflict Studies (BICC) aim to equip participants with the necessary skills for armory inventory management and assessment of compliance levels with best practices in physical security and stockpile management, among other key areas. Well, reporting from Banjul, here is WDL Sankule Janko with more.
The upcoming regional training program aims to bring together security forces from all 15 member states of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, for a comprehensive 10-day session. The training will provide participants from the ECOWAS Small Arms Division with a deep understanding of contemporary practices and techniques in physical security and stockpile management, PSSM, aligned with global standards and best practices. Kofi Mack, a representative of the ECOWAS Commission, underlines the necessity of developing a pool of experts on PSSM within the region, an area where the region has faced a significant lack of requisite expertise.
The prevention of terrorism and inter-community violence requires that the relevant persons are stopped from accessing weapons through a number of measures, including enhancing the management and security of arms and ammunition stock, controlling the acquisition, carrying and use of small arms and light weapons and their ammunition by civilians, and controlling local arms manufacturers.
Highlighting the critical significance of effective management of weapons and security stocks, particularly in the context of the presence of terrorist groups in the region, Sering Modufai, the Defense Minister of the Gambia, emphasizes the importance of such training programs.
Identifying deficiencies in physical security and stockpile management and taking measures necessary to address the safety and security gaps can help prevent unplanned explosion strength controls and enforce compliances with minimum safety and security standards.
The ECOWAS Commission had previously developed a comprehensive roadmap on stockpile management and security, adopted by the member states in 2009. This framework serves as a guiding document for the Commission's interventions and support to member states, aiming to enhance the effective management of arms and ammunition, as well as to facilitate resource mobilization. For NEWSLINK on West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Sankara Jenke reporting from Banjul.
The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, has revealed that 3 million children in Sudan have been displaced since the conflict began between the army and the Rapid Support Forces. The statement was issued on Monday, coinciding with the 200th day of the conflict. UNICEF expressed its concern, stating that the international community and parties involved in the conflict must intensify their efforts to find solutions to the challenges faced by millions of children and families suffering the severe consequences of the violence. The press release highlights that children are bearing the brunt of a crisis for which they bear no responsibility. It further notes that approximately 14 million children in Sudan urgently require life-saving humanitarian aid. The army and the Rapid Support Forces continue to blame each other over the outbreak of conflict and the violations committed during the clashes, despite multiple failed ceasefire attempts.
This is the newspaper review. Stay on top of the news. Get the most important stories with added insight and concise review.
This is the newspaper review.
All right, let's take you to Monrovia as we join Darlington Popper for the press review.
For this edition of Press Review, we have with us the Front Page Africa newspaper, the News newspaper, and the Hot Pepper newspaper. We will begin a review process with the Front Page Africa newspaper. Pardon plead or CDC endorsement. We see the photograph of former Defense Minister Brandon Samukai and President George Weah. While CPP gave into CDC, we see the photograph of Charlie Bronskin, the running mate of Alexander Cummings and the CDC party chairman Moniba Molu, a referendum against the CDC. We will leave it right there on the back page of the Front Page Africa newspaper. It's all about sports. From the Front Page Africa newspaper, the News newspaper is next. CDC chairman wants Boakai retired. We see the photograph of Moniba Molu, the chairman of the Coalition for Democratic Change, and scores of partisans on the front page of the News newspaper. Yombly leads Boakai's campaign in Grand Bassa on the back page of the News newspaper. Educators endorse Weah. Buchanan, Sestos rolled the pavement inside. Gets AFDB's approval. That's the African Development Bank. Chinese doctors expected in Liberia. Minister accused of politicizing health sector. We see the photograph of Health Minister Dr. Wolemi Najala. Now to conclude today's edition of Press Review, our last stop is with the Hot Pepper newspaper. Cheerleads Weah's re-election campaign in Grand Cru. Launches Operation Weah 100% Boakai 0% campaign. As Bapoli candidates, others endorse President Weah. Weah leaps towards landslide victory. On the back page of the Hot Pepper newspaper, Ambassador Nuve endorses President Weah's second-term bid. My endorsement goes beyond GMB. Dr. McIntosh asserts as he declares support for the rescue mission. We will leave it right there. On that note, that is how I would love to conclude today's edition of Press Review. Thank you so much for following, and bye-bye.
And the Darlington Papa there in Monrovia with the Press Review.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
And our guest interview segment this afternoon will take you to the trending development in Burkina Faso following the massive and targeted requisition of citizens in the application of the decree on general mobilization adopted last April by the transitional authorities. Now, this has seen the government suppressing dissents, including journalists and human rights actors who critique the activities of the military government. Our guest, Sadibou Marong, the director of Reporters Without Borders, RSF, West Africa, says there are more human rights abuses to be seen in Burkina Faso.
Yes, it's quite critical, and it's a new issue just emerging since they have voted these countrywide mobilizations for all the varied forces of the country to join, most likely the army, so as to, into the battlefield, so as to push back or fight back the armed group terrorists. But what is really new is the fact that activists, including human rights activists, civil society activists, and journalists have been, onboarded into this process and by force. And this is quite worrying, a very, very worrying trend, because what we have seen is, most of those journalists who have been onboarded are very critical into how the country is managed by the junta. And we consider, this is a kind of reprisals against those who have the dissenting voices, those who are doing media talk shows, doing, broadcasts, and they have the right to enjoy their full junta.
Well, where then is now the place for the freedom of expression, which is embedded even in the Burkinabe Constitution?
The place of journalists is into the newsrooms for them to pursue their constitutional right of providing information to the people. Yeah, but what is more worrying is it's only those journalists who are very critical way of ruling the country that have been onboarded, embedded into this process. And this is quite worrying. And it will represent a risk for all those journalists, even in the battlefield. We don't know. The safety and security issues for those journalists will be also will take place because no one knows how the situation is going to be. No one knows if there is problems, for example, attacks. They will be at the forefront or they will be forced to be the forefront. And then they might be persecuted, they might be kidnapped, they might be even killed by the armed terrorist group. Or it might even be by the military forces who think this is a good and a fine place for them to get rid of these guys, because they have started to be very vocal on issues. No one knows.
Do we fear a crisis looming? If journalists and civil society actors that are critic of the government are put in this position, how much more that of the ordinary Burkinabe? Are we going to see a widespread of human rights abuses?
Yes, in fact, the human rights crisis has already started since the junta is in place. And we consider that because if you take the fight back and the pushback of armed group terrorists, most of the time, military people, they are doing a lot of human rights violations, including mass killing of civilians, including arrest of civilians who have nothing to do into the war, and arbitrary detention. All this been taking place, and most of them are considered as armed group terrorist members, and that is not something they effectively proved. And in the terms of press freedom and freedom of expressions, all those who dare to express themselves in how the country is managed, most of the time they are persecuted, they are pursued, and then they might even be arbitrarily detained. On behalf of what? On behalf of the junta's own will to restrict the civic space and to ban the freedom of expressions. And that's why we consider that the human rights crisis has already started in the country. And the onboarding of this mass onboarding of journalists is the latest human rights violations.
Mr. Barong, finally, what is the way out of this?
In terms of solution, it's absolutely crucial for the junta to be aware of something. They can't permanently restrict people's freedom of expressions, people's freedom of the press, on behalf of their own will of restricting the civic space. This is absolutely not possible, because even if they will keep on arresting people, there will be another people will also stand up for their rights. This is extremely important. That's why they need to be aware of that and also stop forcefully onboarding people. For unless people they decide by themselves, this is their own right also to join the battlefield. But if people are not in a capacity to do that, it's not necessarily, because among some journalists who have been onboarded, there is someone who is 64 years old. But at the age of 64 years, it is quite difficult physically and even mentally for people to sustain and to keep on doing the fight or the pushback of armed terrorists. It is absolutely also crucial for the regional bodies to let the junta know that these abuses needs to be stopped.
That was our guest, Mr. Sadibu Marong, the Director of Reporters Without Border West Africa Office. It's now time for the latest sports update, and here is Sankule Janko.
For this edition of Press Review, we have with us the front page Africa newspaper, the newspaper, and the hot pepper newspaper. We will begin a review process with the front page Africa newspaper. Pardon plead or CDC endorsement. We see the photograph of former Defense Minister Brandon Samukai and President George Weah. While CPP gave into CDC, we see the photograph of Charlie Bronskin, the running mate of Alexander Cummings, and the CDC party chairman Molba Molu. A referendum against the CDC. We will leave it right there on the back page of the front page Africa newspaper. It's all about sports. From the front page Africa newspaper, the newspaper is next. CDC chairman wants Boakai retired. We see the photograph of Molba Molu, the chairman of the Coalition for Democratic Change, and scores of partisans on the front page of the newspaper. Yombly leads Boakai's campaign in Grand Bassam. On the back page of the newspaper, educators endorse Weah. Bukana Sestos rolled the pavement inside. Gets AFDB's approval. That's the African Development Bank. Chinese doctors expected in Liberia. Minister accused of politicizing health sector. We see the photograph of Health Minister Dr. Wolemi Najala. Now to conclude today's edition of Press Review, our last...
We do apologize for that, and that's it on this edition of NewsLink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek for the technical assistance. Well, let's continue the conversation on our social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, WDR News, and Facebook, West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. I am Imo Edet. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to NewsLink via Hot 104.3 FM, New FM 94.0, and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County. For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you, your views, and your opinions.
Hi, I am Alpha Blonde, and I'm always listening to the West African Democratic Radio.
WADR.
Let's go. This is your radio.
Broadcasting live from the Senegalese capital of Dakar.
Broadcasting all day, every day, from the heart and capital city of
Senegal.
24 hours, 7 days a week, all year round. On 94.9 FM. This is West Africa Democracy Radio, Dakar. We got you covered. We got you covered on all fronts. News, programs, special shows, and lots of all new music. From Dakar to Benin, from Nigeria to Ghana, Conakry, Bissau, Niger, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Mali, Mauritania, Ouagadougou, Cape Verde to the Gambia. This is your radio. This is your voice. Your voice. This is West Africa Democracy Radio. And we are on air. We're on air. West Africa